Iran nuclear deal. I'm joined now by Neysun Mahboubi. He is a research scholar at the University of Pennsylvania Center for the Study of Contemporary China. I have to ask you about Trump and this step back from this deal. It's reminiscent of him also backing away from the Paris Climate Accord, in that both the United States and China were both committed to this. Now Trump backing away from both, China staying in, also saying it's going to stay in the JCPOA. Talk to us about this changing dynamic, because it used to be the United States taking the lead on the global stage on these big initiatives. It's not the case now.
Sure. So, of course, we're in this moment in time where it appears that the U.S. is not as bound by international norms, international agreements, international alliances as it used to be. And this may be a state of affairs that will last at least for another 3 years, maybe another 7 years. And meanwhile, that does provide an opportunity for China to step up and act as a more responsible stakeholder in those very same international agreements and alliances that the U.S. had initially structured. So it is a very puzzling dynamic, but it's clear that there is an opportunity here for China if it chooses to take it.
Talk to me about the relationship between China and Iran. What happens to it now?
Well, so that's the crisis part of the story, because as your correspondent just said, China is Iran's largest trading partner in the amount of, I think, about $40 billion US last year. About 80% of that was oil. China needs oil. And so there is a definite interest for China to maintain that trade with Iran. If the U.S. is going to impose sanctions now, potentially secondary sanctions on Chinese businesses doing business with Iran, that provides a problem for China. And at the same time, China wants to maintain better relations with the U.S. The U.S. and China, as you've been talking about in this program and all throughout the year, of course, are locked in these very intense trade negotiations. And so China is also going to be careful not to do too much to alienate the U.S. at this particular point of time. So that set of factors, I think, creates some dilemmas for China.
Well, Macron came to Washington to plead his case. Angela Merkel came to plead her case. Boris Johnson was just here pleading the case of the UK. None of them were successful. It seems as though the allies handcuffed, China in a sense also handcuffed. What's the out here?
It's hard to say. I think if you look at China vis-a-vis the other countries you just listed, the other countries are probably more handcuffed in terms of doing business with Iran than China. China did do business with Iran even during the height of the sanctions regime. And China does have ways of evading sanctions that are potentially less available to some of those other countries. So in that sense, there may also be an opportunity for China here to take up the space that may be left by the Europeans not being able to do the same kind of business with Iran. But that said, China has to be careful not to go too far, to do too much to alienate the U.S. when, at the end of the day, the U.S.-China economic relationship is far more significant than the China-Iran relationship.
That's very interesting. Neysun, thanks so much for your observations.